The dirt was falling on my face, each shovelful blocking out more of the moonlight as my own son stood above my grave, calmly filling in the hole where he'd thrown my unconscious body just hours earlier. I could hear him talking on his phone about the $500,000 life insurance policy he was about to collect, discussing how he'd tell everyone I'd died peacefully in my sleep. But what Marcus didn't know was that the sedatives he'd given me were wearing off, and I was very much alive in that wooden box he'd built to look like a coffin. The next 18 hours would be the most terrifying of my life, but they would also fuel a revenge so complete, so devastating, that my son would spend the rest of his life paying for what he tried to do to me. But let me tell you how it all started, because this story will make you question how well you really know your own children. My name is Evelyn Carter, and at 81 years old, I never imagined my youngest son would try to murder me for money. I live in Bakersfield, California, in the same ranch house where I raised 4 children after my husband died in a mining accident 35 years ago. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning office buildings at night and working at a daycare center during the day, and I thought I'd raised my children to value family, honesty, and hard work above material possessions. 3 of my children turned out exactly as I'd hoped. My daughter Sarah became a teacher, my son Michael became a police officer, and my oldest son David became a successful accountant. But Marcus, my youngest at 38 years old, had always been different. He'd struggled with drug addiction in his 20s, had multiple failed marriages, and seemed to believe the world owed him something he'd never worked to earn. For the past 5 years, Marcus had been pressuring me to change my will and make him the primary beneficiary of my life insurance policy. He'd moved in with me after his latest divorce, claiming he needed time to get back on his feet, but I suspected he was more interested in my assets than my company. He'd been acting strange for weeks, asking detailed questions about my medication schedule, my daily routines, and my plans for the evening. Before I continue my story, I really want to know where you're watching me from. Tell me in the comments what city you're from, and if you can, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you next will shatter your faith in family bonds and show you how far some people will go for money. The night Marcus tried to kill me started like any other evening. He'd offered to cook dinner, something he rarely did, and seemed unusually attentive and caring. He made my favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes, and even opened a bottle of wine to celebrate what he called quality time with my favorite mother. During dinner, he kept refilling my wine glass and encouraging me to relax and enjoy myself. What I didn't know was that Marcus had dissolved a massive dose of sleeping pills in my wine, enough to keep me unconscious for hours while he carried out his plan to bury me alive and collect my life insurance money. As the evening progressed, I began feeling drowsy and disoriented. Marcus suggested I go to bed early, helping me to my room and making sure I was comfortable before saying goodnight. The last thing I remembered was Marcus checking on me around 10 p.m., telling me he was going out for a while and would see me in the morning. But what I discovered when I woke up buried underground would reveal a plan so calculated, so cold-blooded, that it would change everything I thought I knew about my own son. I regained consciousness slowly, my head pounding and my mouth dry from the drugs Marcus had given me. At first, I couldn't understand why everything was completely dark and why I felt like I was lying in a confined space. When I tried to sit up, my head hit something solid just inches above my face. When I reached out with my hands, I felt wooden walls on all sides, barely wider than my body. The horrible reality hit me all at once. I was trapped in some kind of box, underground, with only a few inches of space in every direction. The air was thick and stale, and I could hear the muffled sound of dirt being moved around above me. My son had drugged me, put me in a makeshift coffin, and buried me alive. But Marcus had made one critical mistake in his murder plan. He'd underestimated my will to survive and my knowledge of his criminal intentions. For months, I'd been suspicious of Marcus's behavior and his obsession with my life insurance policy. I'd secretly visited my doctor and asked him to reduce the dosage of my regular medications because I suspected someone might be tampering with them. I'd also started taking only half of my prescribed sleeping pills and hiding the extras, which meant my tolerance for sedatives was much lower than Marcus had calculated. Instead of remaining unconscious for the 8 to 12 hours Marcus had planned, I woke up after only 4 hours, giving me precious time to escape before he finished covering my grave and left me to die. But escape seemed impossible from inside a wooden box buried several feet underground. The coffin Marcus had built was crude but effective, rough plywood held together with screws, with small holes drilled in the sides for air circulation. He'd obviously planned this burial carefully, ensuring I'd have enough oxygen to survive for several hours before suffocating, making my death appear more natural when my body was eventually discovered. But Marcus had also made another mistake that would save my life. He'd used screws instead of nails to assemble the coffin, and the wood was cheap and thin enough that it might be possible to break through with enough force and determination. Using every ounce of strength I could muster, I began kicking at the foot of the coffin while simultaneously pushing against the lid with my hands and shoulders. The wood creaked and flexed with each impact, and I could feel small pieces breaking away. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I managed to kick a hole through the foot of the coffin large enough to push my leg through. Dirt immediately began pouring through the opening, but it also gave me leverage to push harder against the rest of the coffin. Working frantically and fighting panic, I managed to break open a section large enough to crawl through, emerging into a narrow space between the coffin and the dirt walls of the grave. But I was still buried alive, several feet underground, with tons of dirt above me and no clear path to the surface. The grave Marcus had dug was deeper than I'd expected, at least 6 feet down based on how far I'd fallen when he'd thrown my unconscious body into the hole. The walls were steep and muddy, making it nearly impossible to climb out even if I had the physical strength to attempt it. But desperation and fury gave me power I didn't know I possessed. Using pieces of the broken coffin as makeshift tools, I began digging handholds and footholds into the dirt walls of the grave, slowly creating a crude ladder that might allow me to climb to the surface. The physical effort was exhausting for an 81-year-old woman, and several times I nearly gave up, collapsing against the dirt walls and wondering if I should just accept my fate. But the thought of Marcus collecting my life insurance money and getting away with murder filled me with a rage that kept me fighting. After hours of digging and climbing, falling back down and starting over, I finally managed to reach the surface of my own grave. I emerged from the ground like something from a horror movie, covered in dirt, gasping for air, and filled with a determination for revenge that would consume me for the next several months. But Marcus's plan was far from over, and what I discovered about his preparations for my death would reveal just how extensively he'd planned to profit from murdering me. When I crawled out of my grave around 4 a.m., I found myself in a remote area of the desert outside Bakersfield, at least 20 miles from my house. Marcus had obviously chosen this location carefully, ensuring that even if someone discovered my grave, it would be months or years before my body was found. I was disoriented, dehydrated, and still affected by the drugs Marcus had given me, but I knew I had to get back to civilization before he realized I'd escaped. Using the stars for navigation, something my late husband had taught me during our camping trips, I began walking toward what I hoped was the direction of the highway. After walking for 3 hours in the desert, I finally reached a truck stop where a sympathetic driver agreed to give me a ride back to Bakersfield. I told him I'd been in a car accident and needed to get to a hospital, which wasn't entirely a lie considering my physical condition. But instead of going to the hospital or calling the police immediately, I decided to gather evidence of Marcus's crime before confronting him. I knew that without proof, it would be my word against his, and he'd probably claim I was suffering from dementia or some other age-related condition that explained my confused accusations. I needed to catch Marcus in the act of covering up my death and collecting my life insurance money. When I arrived home around 8 a.m., Marcus was gone, but I could see evidence of his activities throughout the house. He'd already begun sorting through my personal belongings, packing up items he considered valuable, and throwing away things he thought were worthless. My jewelry box was open and half empty, and several of my most expensive pieces were missing. But what I found in Marcus's room would provide the evidence I needed to expose his murder plot and ensure he faced justice for what he'd tried to do to me. Marcus had left behind detailed notes about his plan to kill me and collect my life insurance money. Written in his own handwriting, these notes outlined every aspect of his crime, from the sedatives he'd used to drug me to the location where he'd buried my body. He'd even calculated exactly how much money he'd receive from my life insurance policy and how he'd spend it once the insurance company processed his claim. The notes revealed that Marcus had been planning my murder for over 6 months, researching different methods and locations before settling on burial as the technique most likely to appear accidental or natural. He'd practiced digging graves in the desert, timed how long it would take to transport my body, and even researched the legal requirements for reporting a death and filing insurance claims. But the most damning evidence was a series of text messages on Marcus's phone between him and his girlfriend, detailing their plans for how they'd spend my insurance money once I was dead. They'd already made plans to buy a house, take expensive vacations, and pay off debts they'd accumulated through gambling and drug use. Marcus had even taken photos of my grave to document the location in case he needed to lead authorities to my body once he reported me missing. If this story is shocking you, hit that subscribe button because what I did next will prove that revenge is a dish best served cold, and sometimes the best person to get justice for attempted murder is the victim herself. Instead of calling the police immediately, I decided to let Marcus proceed with his plan to report my death and file insurance claims. I wanted to gather as much evidence as possible of his criminal intent and give him enough rope to hang himself with his own greed and stupidity. I spent the next 2 days hiding in a motel while monitoring Marcus's activities through neighbors and friends who agreed to help me gather information about what he was telling people about my disappearance. Marcus had already begun implementing the next phase of his plan. He'd called my other children to report that I'd wandered off during the night and that he was worried about my mental state. He suggested that I might have become confused and lost in the desert, and he'd organized search parties to look for my body in the area where he'd actually buried me. The performance was convincing and manipulative. Marcus played the role of the concerned son perfectly, expressing just the right amount of worry and grief to avoid suspicion while positioning himself to inherit my assets and collect my life insurance money. He'd even called my insurance company to inquire about the process for filing a death claim, claiming he wanted to be prepared in case my body was found and my death was confirmed. The insurance representative later testified that Marcus seemed unusually knowledgeable about policy details and payout procedures for someone who was supposedly focused on finding his missing mother. But Marcus's plan was about to unravel in the most spectacular way possible, because the dead woman he'd tried to murder was very much alive and planning a revenge that would destroy his life just as thoroughly as he'd tried to destroy mine. On the 3rd day after my death, Marcus held a press conference asking for public help in finding my body. He stood in front of TV cameras, tears streaming down his face, begging anyone with information about my whereabouts to contact the police. He described me as a confused elderly woman who might have wandered into the desert and become lost, and he offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of my body. That press conference was broadcast live on local television, and watching Marcus lie about my death while positioning himself as a grieving son filled me with a cold fury that motivated the revenge plan I was about to implement. I had gathered enough evidence to prove Marcus's guilt beyond any doubt. I had his handwritten notes about the murder plan, text messages with his girlfriend about spending my insurance money, photos he'd taken of my grave, and recorded conversations with neighbors where he'd expressed unusual interest in my life insurance policy and estate planning. But instead of simply turning this evidence over to the police, I decided to expose Marcus's crimes in a way that would humiliate him publicly and ensure that everyone in our community knew exactly what kind of person he really was. I contacted a local investigative reporter who specialized in covering crimes and corruption in the Central Valley. I provided him with all the evidence I'd gathered, along with my own testimony about Marcus's attempted murder and the details of my escape from the grave he'd dug for me. The reporter was initially skeptical of my story, but the physical evidence and documentation were so comprehensive that he agreed to investigate further. He worked with police to verify the details of my account and to build a criminal case against Marcus that would be impossible for him to deny or explain away. But the most satisfying part of my revenge was still to come, the moment when Marcus would discover that his murder victim was very much alive and ready to send him to prison for the rest of his life. The reporter arranged for cameras to be present when police served Marcus with an arrest warrant at my house, where he was continuing to sort through my belongings and prepare for his inheritance windfall. The plan was to broadcast Marcus's arrest live on the evening news, exposing his crimes to the entire community that had been sympathizing with him as a grieving son. I hid in the reporter's van across the street, watching through tinted windows as police surrounded my house and prepared to arrest the son who had tried to murder me for money. When police knocked on the door, Marcus answered confidently, probably expecting an update on the search for my body or condolences from concerned community members. Instead, he found himself face to face with Detective Rodriguez, who had been investigating my disappearance and had discovered the truth about Marcus's murder plot. "Marcus Carter, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Evelyn Carter, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder," Detective Rodriguez announced as cameras rolled and Marcus's face went white with shock and panic. "That's impossible," Marcus stammered. "My mother is dead. I've been looking for her body for 3 days. This is some kind of mistake." But then, Detective Rodriguez delivered the line that made my months of planning and suffering worthwhile. "Your mother isn't dead, Marcus. In fact, she's the one who provided us with all the evidence we needed to prove you tried to bury her alive." The look of horror and disbelief on Marcus's face as he realized his victim had survived and exposed his crimes was worth every terrifying moment I'd spent buried in that grave. As police led Marcus away in handcuffs, I emerged from the reporter's van and walked toward my house, very much alive and ready to reclaim the life my son had tried to steal from me. The news footage of Marcus's arrest and my dramatic return from the dead was broadcast throughout California and eventually picked up by national news networks. The story of the grandmother who survived being buried alive and got revenge on her son became a sensation that sparked conversations about elder abuse, family greed, and the lengths some people will go to for money. But Marcus's legal troubles were just beginning, and the evidence I'd gathered would ensure that he faced serious consequences for his attempted murder. Marcus was charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other felonies related to his plan to kill me and steal my insurance money. The evidence against him was overwhelming and undeniable. His own handwritten notes, text messages, photos, and recorded conversations provided prosecutors with everything they needed to secure a conviction. During his trial, the jury heard testimony about the elaborate planning that had gone into my attempted murder, the cold calculation with which Marcus had drugged me and buried me alive, and the callous greed that had motivated him to try to kill his own mother for money. Medical experts testified about the trauma of being buried alive and the physical and psychological damage caused by Marcus's attempt to murder me. They explained that very few people would have survived the experience and that my escape was essentially miraculous given my age and the circumstances of my imprisonment. The prosecutor argued that Marcus's crime represented one of the most heinous examples of elder abuse and family betrayal ever prosecuted in Kern County, and that his actions demonstrated a complete lack of remorse or human decency. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that his client had been suffering from mental illness and drug addiction that impaired his judgment, but the extensive planning and calculation evident in his crime made it impossible to claim diminished capacity or temporary insanity. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Marcus guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling his crimes an unconscionable betrayal of family trust and human decency. But the most satisfying moment of the trial came when I was allowed to address Marcus directly during the sentencing hearing. "You didn't just try to kill me," I told him, my voice steady and strong despite everything I'd been through. "You tried to rob me of my dignity, my legacy, and my right to die naturally surrounded by people who love me. You calculated the value of my life in dollars and decided I was worth more dead than alive. But you failed, and now you'll spend the rest of your life paying for that calculation. Marcus showed no remorse during sentencing and has never apologized for trying to murder me. In the 5 years since his conviction, he's filed multiple appeals and continues to maintain his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. But I've moved on from Marcus's betrayal and focused on rebuilding my life and relationships with my other children who were devastated to learn what their brother had tried to do to me. My daughter Sarah moved back to Bakersfield to be closer to me, and my sons Michael and David have been incredibly supportive throughout my recovery and the legal proceedings. We've all had to come to terms with the fact that Marcus is a dangerous criminal who would have killed his own mother for money, and that the brother and son we thought we knew never really existed. I've also become an advocate for elder abuse prevention and work with law enforcement agencies to educate families about the warning signs of financial exploitation and elder abuse. My case has been featured in training materials for social workers, police officers, and medical professionals who work with elderly victims. The insurance company that Marcus tried to defraud used my case to develop new protocols for investigating suspicious death claims and identifying potential insurance fraud. They've credited my survival and testimony with helping them prevent millions of dollars in fraudulent payouts to other criminals who've tried to murder family members for insurance money. Share this story if it moved you, because elder abuse and family exploitation are more common than most people realize. And sometimes the only way to stop these crimes is for victims to fight back and seek justice for themselves. The house where Marcus tried to murder me has been completely remodeled, and I've turned his former bedroom into a home office where I work on victim advocacy projects and maintain correspondence with other elder abuse survivors. I've also established a foundation that provides financial assistance to elderly victims of family exploitation and helps them access legal resources to protect themselves from greedy relatives who see them as sources of inheritance rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. The desert location where Marcus buried me has been marked with a memorial stone that reminds visitors about the importance of protecting elderly community members from exploitation and abuse. Every year on the anniversary of my death and resurrection, I visit that memorial to reflect on how close I came to becoming another statistic in the epidemic of elder abuse that affects millions of Americans every year. But I also use that anniversary to celebrate my survival and the justice that was served when Marcus was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who are supposed to love and protect us, hiding their greed and evil behind masks of family loyalty and concern. But sometimes, when victims refuse to stay silent and fight back against their abusers, justice can be served and other potential victims can be protected from similar crimes. Marcus thought he could murder me with impunity because I was an elderly woman who wouldn't be able to defend herself or expose his crimes. Instead, he learned that underestimating the strength and determination of a grandmother who refuses to be victimized was the biggest mistake of his criminal career. My escape from that grave wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring that a dangerous predator would never have the opportunity to hurt another elderly person the way he tried to hurt me. That's the power of refusing to be a victim and choosing instead to fight for justice, no matter how old you are or how impossible the odds might seem. The sedatives Marcus used to drug me have been completely eliminated from my system, but the determination to protect other elderly people from family exploitation grows stronger every day. Today, at 86 years old, I'm healthier and more active than I've been in years. And I'm using every day I have left to make sure other families don't experience the betrayal and violence that Marcus brought into our lives. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's using your survival to prevent other people from becoming victims of the same crimes that nearly destroyed your own life. Marcus will spend the rest of his life in prison, but I'll spend the rest of mine making sure his attempted murder led to something positive and protective for other elderly people who deserve to age with dignity and security. That's the difference between a victim and a survivor, and it's why I'll never stop fighting for justice and protection for the most vulnerable members of our communities.